So thank you, Father. Thank you, Emmett. I am incredibly honored and humbled to receive this award, to watch that video. It really is quite special. And so, not surprisingly, I'd like to start with some thank yous and by acknowledging my many, many blessings. And of course, I'll start with my family and my beloved wife, Alexandra, as I've been blessed with the most supportive spouse imaginable. That is true. That is true every day, but it was most obviously true on the couple of days when I told her I'd be leaving two very well-paying large law firms for the uncertainty of small firm practice. I think the fact that Alex had a Harvard MBA to fall back on probably did help, but she was still remarkably supportive. Alex and I have been blessed with three wonderful boys, one of whom, Paul Gregory, is with us tonight. Knowing they are watching has inspired me to try to be a better example for them. My family blessings started very early with wonderful parents. My mother was a late convert to the faith, so in my formative years, it was my father who brought us to church and made sure that we got to CCD. Gerald Clement was a great example of the manly virtues. I've also been blessed professionally with incredible mentors, including Judge Silberman, Justice Scalia, Ken Starr, John Ashcroft, and Ted Olson. I have also been blessed throughout with incredible colleagues. My longtime assistant, Janet Potter, worked with me for nearly 20 years across 5 different jobs and at least 8 office moves, and she has now passed the baton to Ruth Barwick. I am blessed with amazing legal colleagues, starting first and foremost with Erin, who has left big law twice herself to stay loyal to her clients. And I want to thank also the roughly dozen of our colleagues who left Kirkland and moved with us to Clement Murphy in a great leap of faith. And I am blessed by my friendship with Viet Din, who is here tonight, who was there to catch me with his Bancroft boutique the first time I made the leap from big law. With the benefit of hindsight, his decision to accept me as a partner doesn't look too bad. But at the time, agreeing to take on the defense of the Defense of Marriage Act after King and Spalding and the Obama administration suggested that defending the statute was beyond the pale was no small act of courage. I have also been blessed with great colleagues outside of the firm, including lawyers like Mark Rienzi, who you heard from at the Beckett Fund, and Hiram Sasser from First Liberty, who came all the way from Texas to be here tonight. They have partnered with me to help achieve landmark victories in the Supreme Court on behalf of religious liberty. And I've been equally blessed with great clients like the Little Sisters of the Poor, Hobby Lobby, Conestoga Wood, and Coach Kennedy, who all had the courage to take a stand and take it all the way to the Supreme Court. The clients are the real heroes in these cases, and I accept this award on their behalf. I've also been blessed by the amazing Catholic institutions in the Washington, D.C. area that help sustain the faith, starting with the CIC. We have also been blessed by the priests of the Basilica of St. Mary's and throughout the Arlington Diocese. Nothing about growing up in the Archdiocese of Milwaukee prepared me for the clarity of preaching and the resulting vibrancy of the Arlington Diocese. And finally, I would be remiss if I did not count the Heights School as among our blessings. We found it somewhat by accident when it was clear that our oldest son was done with the parish school. But we could not ask for a better education for our boys or a better community for our whole family. Having counted my blessings, let me say a few words about where we are in the ongoing fight for religious liberty. Let me start with something of a paradox. The Supreme Court has never been more protective of religious liberty. But on a day-to-day basis, it seems like both our religious beliefs and our ability to express and act on them have rarely been more threatened. Now, both these seemingly contradictory propositions are absolutely correct. It is the best of times and the worst of times for religious liberty. The first half of the paradox is undeniable and straightforward. Just in the past few terms, the Supreme Court has overruled Lemon, made clear that teachers and coaches do not need to shed their religious beliefs at the schoolhouse gates, unanimously strengthened workers' protection against religious discrimination in the workplace, and made clear that not only does the Establishment Clause permit religious schools to participate in school choice programs, but the Free Exercise Clause affirmatively prohibits excluding religious schools from such programs, notwithstanding state Blaine amendments, which are finally being recognized as anti-Catholic and anti-religion, consistent with their know-nothing origins. Given all that, it seems odd to view our religious freedom as under assault. But I do not think there is any doubt that being a faithful Catholic or a faithful Christian is more countercultural today than at any time during my lifetime. So how do we explain the paradox? There are two serious threats to religious liberty which are ultimately related. First, there's a judicial tendency to second-guess religious beliefs where they overlap with secular concepts. There's really no threat that a religious belief will be second-guessed by a secular court when it comes to something like transubstantiation, where there's no secular analog. A judge would never second-guess a religious belief that makes no sense when viewed through secular eyes. In fact, outside the claim to belonging to the Church of the Zero Tax Rate or the Church of Unlimited Marijuana, courts have rarely questioned the sincerity of religious beliefs. And even the latter church might get a free pass these days. But the same judges who would never question the sincerity of beliefs about miracles in the afterlife have a very different approach when religious beliefs have a close secular analog. I first noticed this in the Little Sisters case. No judge would actually say the Little Sisters' religious beliefs were insincere. But the majority of lower court judges who heard these cases would not credit the Little Sisters' view that they were morally complicit in the provision of contraceptives through their health care plans. They essentially held that the Little Sisters and other religious groups were just confused about the operation of their health care plans or confused about their degree of complicity. The judges were familiar with civil law concepts about when one party is responsible for the actions of another, like aiding and abetting and vicarious liability, and they could not credit overlapping but different religious views. This was brought home to me again in a case I'm currently handling for the Church of Latter-day Saints and an allegation of fraud in tithing. As many of you know, the Church of Latter-day Saints has a practice of tithing that would make many a parish priest jealous. And in this case, a former member of the church is suing for the return of his tithing contributions on the theory that they were procured by fraud. If the claim were that he was told that tithing was critical to the salvation of his mortal soul, and he no longer believes in salvation, his suit would be dismissed in a heartbeat. But because he instead claimed that he was misled about the specific purposes to which the funds were put, the Ninth Circuit analogized it to a suit claiming that hurricane relief funds were put to different uses, and the fraud claim could go forward to the jury. Needless to say, we are seeking further review, but the salient point is that the existence of a close secular analog emboldened the courts to intervene where they should have deferred. Second, there's a related problem when religious beliefs run counter to secular dogma. If the court confronts an idiosyncratic religious practice that does not run afoul of any secular dogma, like the length of a Muslim prisoner's beard, the religious adherent wins 9-0. But if the court confronts a claim that interferes with a right to contraception or abortion or some other secular dogma, The court divides sharply, and religion is blamed for the divisiveness. Making matters worse, just about the highest modern secular value is toleration, and there's little worse than being labeled intolerant. That is a particular problem for Catholics because our religion is not tolerant of certain practices that are widespread in our culture, and expressing views on such matter consistent with our faith will quickly get you labeled an intolerant bigot. Of course, this demand for tolerance is entirely a one-way street, as speech that contradicts the secular dogma is increasingly labeled a form of discrimination. That is, of course, nonsense. Speech is speech, not discrimination, and the remedy for speech you disagree with is more speech, not suing for discrimination. But the tendency to define disagreeable speech as discrimination or otherwise out of bounds is prevalent and is the heart of culture, of cancel culture. You see it at law firms with my own example. Having been forced out of King and Spalding at one point for defending the traditional definition of marriage, then 10 years later, the same thing happened in a different context where one could perhaps entertain the thought that, well, maybe for conservatives or for Catholics, taking positions on abortion or same-sex marriage are out of bounds. But the universe of things that are out of bounds has expanded over time in ways that made it impossible for me to continue at Kirkland & Ellis, even though I was representing a long-standing firm of the client, rather, and we had just won 6-3 in the Supreme Court of the United States. And once again, this is entirely a one-way street. If you look at the Dobbs case, for example, and check out the law firms that filed briefs in the Dobbs case, it's not that all of the major law firms in the country decided that they couldn't file in an abortion case. It's just that all the major law firms in the country decided they could only file on one side of the abortion dispute. Now, this one-sidedness and this tendency to label speech that people disagree with as discrimination poses a particular threat to religious liberty. The great national consensus that produced the Religious Freedom Act of 1993 has broken down because some want to label religiously motivated beliefs about sexual orientation or marriage or the differences between men and women as discrimination. If you put these two trends together, you can see a real threat that a right to religious liberty will be marginalized to cover religious beliefs that do not threaten the secular consensus, but not to protect church teaching on some of the most important issues facing society today. They will spot us transubstantiation and the dogma of the Immaculate Conception, but silence us when it comes to protecting life or defining marriage. One of Justice Scalia's many great speeches, collected by Ed Whalen and Christopher Scalia in Scalia's Speaks, is the tale of the two Thomases. In that speech, Justice Scalia contrasted the courage and humility of St. Thomas More with the hubris of Thomas Jefferson. Exhibit A in his criticism of Jefferson was the so-called Jefferson Bible, in which, over the course of just a few nights, Jefferson blue-penciled out all of the miracles and other materials deemed implausible by a secular humanist and kept only the social teachings of Jesus, which even Jefferson credited as, quote, aphorisms and precepts of the purest morality and benevolence, end quote. Consistent with Jefferson's approach, his, quote, Bible ends with Jesus being laid in the tomb. Everything from Easter morning to the Ascension was excised from the narrative, rejected by Jefferson as implausible, or, as Justice Scalia memorably put it, Jefferson deemed this material as invented by the disciples, quote, presumably part of their clever plan to get themselves crucified, end quote. The Jefferson Bible was worthy of Justice Scalia's ridicule, but we are at risk of being consigned to a kind of reverse Jefferson Bible, where we can have the loaves and fishes and the wedding feast at Cana, but not the church's social teaching on marriage and divorce or anything else today's secular humanists deem retrograde or intolerant. One of the great fights of our times is the struggle to ensure that our rights to free speech and free exercise are not limited to what Jefferson excised. Our religion is not just about the mysteries of the body and the blood and the virgin birth. It is also about human relationships and issues where our faith's enduring teachings are in conflict with modern secular orthodoxy. We are called to address these issues with consideration and compassion and humility, but we are not called to be silent. I am humbled by this award, but there is much work to be done. I look forward to continuing to fight for genuine religious liberty and the right to advocate the Church's teachings in full, not just the parts that secular society deems harmless for the time being. Thank you very much.